3, 2.
Okay, hello everybody. We're a little bit late today, but as you can see, we've changed the location as well. We're here in the recording studio that I use for my radio show, and Monday night is the night that I record my radio show, Ben's Country Music Show, and so you catch me in the middle of recording the show, but I'll take a little break now to read you the next chapter of Walking on Cinders, and this is going to be chapter number 5, and we're moving very quickly through the book, but hopefully you're looking forward to another reading tonight, and this is chapter 5 of Walking on Cinders, which came out about 10 years ago in May of 2010. Okay. The life of a soldier is never a dull one. This had soon become an unofficial slogan for anyone conscripted into the army since the war began. 1 month you might be fighting close to the historic Flanders fields, another you might be destroying rebel strongholds in southern Afghanistan. If you were very unlucky, then your life would be cut short and you would die in battle. These were the perils of a job, and no one soldier complained about it. At about the same time that Miss Marmalade was leaving the Drury Lane Theatre, Chris Aston, Thomas Fisher and Ewan Roberts were signing their lives away to the cause. The Colonel had made it hard for them to decline. The fate of nations may now rest on their shoulders, and even these three good friends couldn't avoid both the responsibility and the excitement of their mission. They were informed that their plane was at 9:30 the following morning, and then they were sent on their way. Colonel Smith had hastily organised a leaving party and ensured that Chris noted down the start time was 7:30 prompt. It was now 7:10 and Chris was still standing inside the barrack walls, waiting for his friends. Thomas was fiddling idly with a black cap while trying in vain to smarten himself up with a dab of L'Amour aftershave. Ewan, however, was dressing suitably for the occasion in denim jeans and a shirt, but he kept messing with his hair until it was exactly perfect. Chris was different. He considered the party no reason to dress up and wore the same old combat trousers and a green hooded t-shirt. "Aren't you guys ready yet?" Chris spoke through gritted teeth. "It's at least half an hour's drive across the city and we're already late." He drummed his fingers against the edge of the door frame and he stood so that he was halfway in and halfway out, waiting impatiently. "Oh, we need to look good for the ladies," smiled Thomas, finally setting his cap in a suitable position. "At least we've taken a bit of pride in our appearance." "There probably won't even be any girls there," Chris muttered under his breath. "We're only going because the Colonel invited us." "You mean laid the whole thing on for us?" said Ewan, his showmanship returning. This was their cue to leave, both for Ewan and Thomas, who were wary of getting the wrong side of their leading comrade. "Anyway," Ewan said a few minutes later as they were walking towards Chris's hover car, "you know what it's like in London? This is a leaving party. I've been to one of these before, and trust me, the ladies will be all over us." He seemed to have found a new air of confidence this evening, and as he and Thomas climbed into the back while Chris took the driver's seat, he couldn't stop himself from giving his friend a hearty slap on the back. The St James's Place Working Men's Club lay on the site of the original London Bank, although the vault and safe had been moved closer to the Parliament buildings many years ago. It was far from the perfect location. Its dark and dingy facade and its back door, which exited into a dirty alleyway, caused it to become associated with London's many criminal syndicates. It became a haunt for the drug takers who would never be considered for military service. Alas, in these trying times, it was all that the armed forces could afford. Even if it was cleaned up in preparation for the ceremony, it would never be grand enough to benefit its task. As she approached the building via the grotty back street, its reputation preceding it, Miss Marmalade only hoped that she could bring a little class to proceedings. However much the sudden change of venue had disappointed her. The steps up to the entrance of the building were steep, and she found it hard to climb upwards in her high-heeled shoes. This particular evening, she had decided to try something a little bit different, with a short blue and white patterned dress that left very little to the imagination. The soldiers will love it, she thought. Miss Marmalade had become accustomed to the attention that went along with being the force's sweetheart. It meant that she had many admirers, who provided a series of post-show dates. However, she never let any relationship become intimate. It didn't take long for her to notice the portly gentleman standing in front of the frosted glass. It was obvious he had been assigned the task of looking out for someone, but seemed to have fallen asleep at the most crooked of angles. His body was facing backwards towards the main hall, while his face was looking outwards towards the road. Miss Marmalade quickly rectified this with a loud tap of the glass, which brought the man to his senses. "Oh, I'm dreadfully sorry," he smiled, fumbling with the lock on the door. "I was supposed to look out for someone arriving, but I must have fallen asleep." Miss Marmalade merely smiled and looked beyond the gentleman's shoulders towards the main hall. A crowd was beginning to gather around the stage. "Right," she began. "I am Miss Marmalade, and this is the birthday party, I presume." "A birthday party?" the gentleman queried. "Oh no, this is a leaving party for the lads who are off to France tomorrow." He pointed towards the double doors, and the Force's sweetheart immediately made haste. "Change of venue, change of event," she muttered under her breath, while hoping that her manager really had found some full-time work. "Still, it's better than nothing." And with that, she headed to the side of the stage to start her performance. Chris had parked the hover car at the back of the club and was now following Ewan and Thomas towards the entrance. By the time they arrived, the portly gentleman had disappeared inside, and they crossed the threshold from the street. All three simultaneously glanced at their watches to see how late they really were. 8:03. One of the double doors that led to the main hall had been propped open, and from within the sound of a familiar voice wafted out. Chris recognised it at once. So that's why he wanted us here so promptly, he thought, so he could listen to his speech in its entirety. Quickly he gestured to his friends that they should enter silently by the open door and stand at the very back. From her position on the left-hand side of the stage, just behind the curtain, Miss Marmalade could see and hear everything. A pompous officer was standing centre stage, speaking into a microphone. He had a very boring voice. The odds words floated back to her: courage, bravery, and the Thames barracks, but none of them made any connection. What did surprise her, though, was when three young men sneaked in through the open doors unnoticed. She studied each one in turn. A baseball cap, nothing strange there. Combat trousers and tired eyes, perhaps the leader of the group. These were things that she could take in at a glance, but when her gaze met the third member of the group, she remained transfixed, recognising him but unable to put her finger on precisely where from. Drawing her gaze back to the centre, she realised that the pompous officer had stopped speaking and was now gazing out across the audience. "Good," she whispered with a sigh of relief. Yet what happened next only proved to make a bad situation worse. Colonel Smith was squinting towards the back of the room. The speech had gone well, he thought, but he had still to introduce his protégés. "Never mind," he conceded, when he noticed Chris was standing at the very back of the hall. "After all this, it'll be time for the drinking and dancing." "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in his trademark monotone, "before I introduce tonight's entertainment, I would like to present to you our reason for being here." He looked out across all the faces and grimaced. Why had he invited all these dignitaries, all of these officials? "This morning a terrible attack was witnessed in the very heart of London, one which can be traced all the way back to leading reform terrorists. The President declared a state of emergency, and it was under these terms that he asked me to select 3 of the best soldiers from the Thames Regiment for immediate foreign deployment. Together they will begin battle which will end the war. I'd like to welcome Staff Sergeant Aston, Corporal Ewan Roberts, and Private Thomas Fisher." The hall erupted in a round of applause that echoed around the roof space, and it became clear to Chris that they were expected to join the Colonel centre stage. When Colonel Smith had made a sufficient fuss of his 3 young protégés, Miss Marmalade finally took to the stage. There was another round of rapturous applause, and the Force's sweetheart made her entrance. Leaving the stage by the left-hand side, Ewan Roberts was surprised to find this famous woman on the bill. Although he'd never actually seen Miss Marmalade, he'd heard many stories. Now, though, when the time finally arrived, he discovered the girl now standing on stage was the same one he had seen only that morning. What a coincidence. By 10:15, Miss Marmalade had completed her set and was accepting dance requests. This was her favourite part of the evening, listening to the soldiers and learning their stories as they danced with her. She loved being in control. But later in the evening, while she was standing at the back of the hall chatting with 2 tall soldiers Chris had met on his first tour of duty in Iraq, all this changed. Ewan had already had a few too many, and Thomas had danced with almost every woman in the hall. But when "Let's Face the Music and Dance" rang out from the speakers, they found they simply couldn't help themselves. "Care for a dance?" Ewan whispered, the soft tones into Miss Marmalade's ear. To say she was taken by surprise would have put it mildly, but then she could not resist a dance with one of the men who had been heading... But then how could she resist a dance with one of the men who would be heading overseas tomorrow, especially the one she recognised? The music went on, and Ewan slipped his hands around her waist. He couldn't believe he was here, with the Force's sweetheart, when, to him, she was nothing more than a normal woman. It was strange for Miss Marmalade too. To her it felt more personal when she could tell, To her it felt more personal when she couldn't tell if this was a good or a bad thing. Without thinking about it, Ewan was soon resting his head on her shoulder, and before long he was whispering into her ear. Her scent was heady, and for a moment he was overcome. "I know who you really are," he whispered bluntly. "Yes," she replied. There was no sign of passion or emotion. She merely waited for his reply. "I saw you this morning. I recognised your face immediately. You were standing outside the cafe." There was a short pause. "The one that was destroyed in the blast. And I was waiting in the corner. I saw you. Except that you were wearing a black skirt and white pinafore. I might never have seen Miss Marmalade before, but I've seen you. I simply couldn't forget your pretty face." Ewan had let his hands weave tightly around Miss Marmalade's back, while his head remained on her shoulder as they moved in time with the music. But Jennifer was struggling, wriggling under his grasp, and before he realised, she broke free and ran towards the door. Everyone watched her, but they didn't care. Everyone watched her, but she didn't care. What Miss Marmalade had just heard was too much, and it wasn't until she was on the other side of the door and away from the dancers that she finally felt safe. Waiting for the double doors to shut behind her, she tried to remember where her dressing room was. Now there were people heading after her, but as she skidded around the corner and into the first corridor, she steered herself into the second and realised they were starting to disperse. By the time she reached the front door, she was running so fast that she hardly noticed anything around her. Click, a sound that froze in her mind. The heel of her left shoe had broken away from the sole and sent her spinning off balance into a heap at the foot of a gentleman who had just paused by the frosted glass. "Oh, I am sorry," she winced, standing up, believing that she had embarrassed herself in front of the same portly gentleman who had shown her in earlier. "Oh, you always were excitable," he smiled. "At least I found you in the end. I've been driving around all evening." And at that moment Miss Marmalade recognised his voice. It was in all the commotion that she had completely forgotten to expect a visit from her manager, and yet here he stood, beaming down at her. "Before you say anything," the Force's sweetheart began, "there is no way that I will accept the President's offer. It's just too dangerous." Her manager merely stood, his expression unchanged. "Well then, I suppose it's a good job that I found you employment," he smiled. "A proper paid job." For a moment they both paused, and then, forgetting everything that had happened, it was all Miss Marmalade could do not to wrap her arms around the silly old fool.